Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are and what you're doing. Today, I am so excited because we have, I don't know how to describe you, Chris. I almost sort of feel like saying the OG of Google. Is that a fair description? Sort of like the original gangster of Google. Is that fair?
I mean, that's one way. That's one way. I don't think I quite qualify for industry vet status just yet, but I've been around for a while.
Yeah, for sure.
Simply put, my role is to be a voice for the industry at Google.
Yeah.
To help champion the industry and to help create positive change.
Yeah.
We've done that in a bunch of ways, but that's predominantly what I'm being tasked with.
For sure. So you have a very unique perspective. So you've been a poker player, so a player yourself. You were 6 years with Betfair on the operator side of things, and now 9 years with Google. But so let's try a fun exercise. So if you take the 9 years at Google, and you had to sort of look back over the 9 years, and I'll give you like 1 minute to take us like from 9 years back till now, sort of the key milestones, or some of the things that really sort of spring out in your mind, the biggest steps of the Google journey, if you will, or product launches or changes to the landscape, whatever happened. How would you describe the last nine years in 1 minute?
Wow, in 1 minute. God, so much has happened that makes that quite complicated. So I think DoubleClick and everything that went on with DoubleClick was huge. I think enterprise search bidding products and all of that change was great in terms of just what was capable. Video has perhaps been the biggest thing. It was certainly something that we loosely talked about when I first started, and as I said before, it makes up a significant chunk of what I do now. Hosting live games on YouTube, allowing gambling advertisers to position themselves against those live games. Obviously, there's been some regulatory changes with what we can do there.
Yeah,
that's all been super exciting. I could get quite geeky and talk to when we shifted how AdWords works with enhanced campaigns, which went down. It didn't go down great, and trying to mitigate and manage that situation was a fun one. What we've done with AdMob and bringing that in, what's that meant on the app side as well, has been really interesting. And then just automation and machine learning and everything that now means. Again, if I was to say video dominates a lot of what I talk about, machine learning and automation probably makes up the rest of it. It's predominant across every single thing that we do. It's go-to from a product point of view, and again, that dominates. Then we've got some policy wins along the way. Most recently, we managed to open the Play Store in 15 more countries, which is clearly a good thing. We've managed to do some positives around category opt-out, whereby users can now opt out of receiving ads for gambling and alcohol. A huge win for us, and helps us position the products as being something that's sustainable. For this industry, and we have a bunch of other protections that are built into that. So, quick whistle stop tour. I'm not sure if that was a minute.
No, that's fantastic. How about, I was just thinking, the move from desktop to mobile over 9 years. Was that already sort of still quite big, the mobile side, or have you seen a change there? Or
well, clearly significant change, but I've always felt that the gambling industry was probably 2, 3, 4 years ahead. Of everybody else within that space. It very naturally fell into the mobile space, and whilst that started however many years ago with WAP or whatever else, I always felt in working with the operators there was never a need for me to go in and educate on the role of mobile, or have to go in and tell them how big mobile was going to be. They all kind of got it, and that was very different to retail, very different to travel, where it always felt like a constant battle. It felt that you were constantly up against it in terms of trying.
You're still talking mobile, probably there.
Industries. still, and you'll often get you'll always get the throwaway brief where they'll want to talk about. They haven't quite managed to understand mobile yet, but they'll want to talk about augmented reality. That's always the interesting with some of those industries. I always thought the gambling industry just got it, and they were just hoping that we would move along at a pace that would allow them to remain competitive. So that was always a good thing, certainly for this industry.
Okay. Fantastic. So if we just look at the global trends, the shift towards digital, and sort of these two buckets, display versus search, are you seeing some of the same sort of trends where you're sitting, Chris? What's your view on the year that has passed and the year we're going through at the minute?
Yeah, look, it's a nice place to start. If you were to look at the market cap of of a Google or an Alphabet or a Facebook or a Twitter, or Amazon, albeit it's difficult to carve out its media division. Coming out of the pandemic, they're all considerably up year on year, and given the size and scale of those businesses, that's no mean feat. And if you were to listen to the Microsoft CEO, he'll talk to 2 years worth of digital transformation in 2 months. I think McKinsey coins it as 10 years worth in 3 months. Certainly from a US e-commerce penetration point of view, I think my favorite kind of throwaway line is that as to how it's been coined is the quickening and the great acceleration.
Mm-hmm.
We can confuse it as much as we want to, but more people are online, and many of our old habits have changed, and in some cases permanently. It's helped us to break a bunch of old habit loops, and of the numbers that we're seeing, a considerable percentage are new online users. If I was to look at my gran up there in Stockport in the northwest, she's probably now got five retail apps on her phone from having none previously, and she prefers to do the Friday big shop and have that delivered to her as opposed to going out. So that's net new business. That's net new eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it still doesn't prevent the horrible process that is returning something that's been delivered online, but that's just a beast that I think we're all going to have to live with for the rest of our lives. But what that's meant is that ad dollars will simply follow the users. And so when you think about the growth of digital, so if you think about marketing in general, advertising in general has taken a little bit of a hit, which was always typically going to be the case coming out of a pandemic as budgets were looked at. Digital's actually done quite well. Simply because the eyeballs have flowed more to digital. And then there's some cuts of that data. If you look at the travel industry in general, down for very obvious reasons, whereas retail and e-commerce massively up, again for obvious reasons. And gambling has done pretty well. It's been certainly from the digital side, and again we can cut it by the various industries, but from the digital side, there's been on the sports betting side, a perfect storm, if you will, once events kicked back on, and for the casino, bingo, and poker industries, poker in itself, was up whatever that was, 250% or whatever. So in general, digital marketing, has come out of this in a positive way. Video perhaps being, I think video is perhaps the single best example, and by that I mean, if you think about consumer behavior, I myself, as someone who works for YouTube, had never heard of Joe Wicks before the pandemic. Now, I've probably done X amount of HIIT exercise classes. I didn't even know what a HIIT exercise class was pre-pandemic, but I've probably done X amount of HIIT exercise classes through YouTube, through my TV, than I'd ever done before. And when we think about, you mentioned content consumption habits, that's been perhaps one of the biggest changes that has helped to facilitate and accelerate advertising dollars coming online, because eyeballs are now watching online video far more than they ever were before. And that's been huge. And us sitting with YouTube, probably the largest commercial online video platform in the world, has been great for us. But that's typically what has seen that drive, and that's why, from a digital point of view, advertising spend has gone up, whereas in general, it's not quite the same.
And let's pick our crystal ball a bit. So what's going to happen now when countries open up and we go back to normal or new normal or whatever we call it? What do you think is going to happen to those consumption habits and the video consumption and in general?
Yeah, I certainly don't think we'll go back to where we were. I think I hate to say this, but there is a new normal. And I think we're all somewhat comfortable with that new normal, albeit in different parts of the world. We would often talk to the future being here, it's just not evenly distributed. And I was I was on a call with some of our colleagues in Dublin earlier today, and they're still thinking through what coming out of lockdown looks like. Whereas for myself, sat here in London, we've been out of lockdown for best part of 2 months.
Yeah.
And we're already starting to enjoy some of the freedoms that we took for granted previously.
Yeah.
But I certainly am living with some new normals, and we see that in the search behavior that we see through users, and that's arguably one of the biggest arbiters, or certainly one of the biggest research units that we can call upon to understand what that new normal could be.
Yeah. Your gran is going to continue shopping on Fridays.
Online. Oh, big time. Yeah. Oh, big time. Yeah, and I can't see her ever going to a shop again. Just good. Exactly. She'll fundamentally get lazier.
And whoever has been ordering food online to a much greater extent will not just suddenly stop and purely go to restaurants, right? So that the online side of food delivery will most likely also remain, right?
Oh yeah, completely. Yeah. And we see it within this industry as well. April's a difficult month to look at, given where we were with the lockdown and the cancellation of events. But sports betting queries in April were up 300% year on year.
Yeah.
Whereas for April, from a poker point of view, it was down 65% year on year. But again, previously in April 2020, poker was up 220%.
Yeah.
So we're seeing it a little bit in gambling in terms of how users are querying and looking for information and whatever else. But in general, I think we'll have some kind of hybrid future whereby people are just far more comfortable utilizing online propositions. Those that were already digitally native and those that were already relatively savvy from a digitally point of view are probably going a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
And those that were perhaps new to all the experiences that digital can offer them will probably lean into a greater degree. It certainly won't become the new normal, I'd imagine, for a few generations, but they'll certainly lean in far more than they did previously. So this will net out with a far greater, there'll be a far greater balance towards digital.
Good. So one of the very, very sort of hot topics, if you will, is it's been going on for a while, but even more so is sort of privacy, third-party cookies, first-party cookies, zero-party data, all these kind of things. So let's try and set the scene a little bit. So Google has been quite sort of leading the field in terms of announcing stopping third-party cookie tracking in the Chrome browser, at least, right? So just give us the brief summary from your side. How is it on the inside of Google at the minute, speaking about privacy, third-party Google cookies, et cetera, et cetera? What's the latest and greatest?
Well, first and foremost, it's complicated.
Yes.
It's very complicated. I've sat through up-team training sessions on what the future will look like and what does that mean from a privacy perspective. And first and foremost, marketing fundamentally won't change. There will still be, or you will still have to have a almost religious-like focus on the customer. You'll have to think through the purchase funnel. You'll have to work through awareness through to action and loyalty. So,
but there's no big bang, right? People get scared, right? Third-party cookies gone. What are we going to do now? A lot of people are sort of concerned about that. So let's just underline that. There's not going to be a big bang. We will figure this out. Is that correct?
We will. And there are a bunch of solutions that are already being put out there. And perhaps we can talk to that. We can talk to that in a few minutes. I think it probably makes sense just to set the scene a little with what's got us to this point.
Yeah.
And I think understanding the reasons behind the privacy changes, certainly from a CMO and a C-level point of view, are essential in terms of setting future strategy. So if you think, number one, users just lacking trust and just demanding greater privacy, there's clearly the need for some kind of change. We're now seeing that change. So point two would be the browser changes. This is where it all starts to get quite complicated, between Safari, Mozilla, and then what's been going on with Chrome. So that's probably number two in terms of the big privacy changes, in terms of the big browser changes. And then there's the big regulatory changes as well. And these would have been these would have been the big changes that really made the headlines 2 or 3 years ago. From a Europe point of view, it was GDPR, all about consent, ticking all of those boxes every time you go onto a web page. The US has their version of GDPR now. South America's got its own version, not necessarily South America, Brazil, and whatever else. So that's going to become the norm. So there's three big drivers of change between users, browser changes, and then regulatory changes.
Yeah. It's coming. It's here to stay, and now we need to figure out how do we deal with this, right? And what do we do going forward? So
exactly.
Segueing into that, what sort of consequences do you see for the iGaming industry when this is coming in, and more importantly, what are the solutions for the operators, the affiliates, anyone who's very interested in this topic? How should they be thinking?
So that's a really interesting one, and I sit here with my Google hat on, so I could give you the Google blurb on what does that mean for privacy. But I think fundamentally we need to be in a position whereby you have a business that is comfortable with change, and a business that's ready to understand what's gone on with privacy, and therefore make adjustments in terms of your setup. So if you were to think through a third-party cookie, and what does that mean? Well, the use of third-party cookie are targeting, personalization, and measurement. Third-party cookies have helped support the ad-supported web for a long time. They help publishers make more money. They help advertisers reduce wastage. And if you're a publisher within this space, let's say you're the New York Times, for example, and you have 6 million subscribers, that's a hell of a lot of data that you can work with. Equally, if you're Google or Facebook. So there's going to be partnerships that you can still try to kind of manufacture and build media plans around that won't necessarily change. So if I'm an operator or I'm an affiliate, I'm still thinking about my media mix. I'm still thinking through, well, does this drastically change from a Google point of view? Does this drastically change from a Facebook point of view? Does this drastically change in my affiliates? Perhaps not. Does this just drastically change with some of the big display media buys that I'm making? Probably not. You will have to make some changes. So from a Google point of view, for you to take advantage of most of our future technologies, you would have to have something called a global site tag that you're putting in place on all web pages. And that's something that we're monitoring very closely, because we know that's what will help fuel a privacy driven future. I'm sure Facebook have an equivalent. I'm sure Amazon probably have an equivalent. So if I'm an operator, I'm starting to think, well, what does that mean for us? And then I'm becoming, there's probably the need to become more comfortable with gaps in your data. That's just going to be the nature of the future. And when you're thinking about tracking, one has to get comfortable with this idea of prediction more so than precision. And by that I mean you're going to need to augment your data. There's going to need to be far more modeling. Certainly when working with some of the big platforms and when working with some of your media partners in terms of how they understand, who's converted where. Because without a cookie to do that, then we're all going to be struggling. But what you will find is there will be some solutions that are brought up to plug the gaps that are lost through cookies. So if you think about targeting and prospecting, what you'll start to see is audience segments, and there will be clusters. Again, from a Google point of view, we have however many billion users across our 7 products. So we have the scale with which to build these clusters, and we can offer them as in-market audience. Again, that's very much prediction. You can offer them as affinity targeting, so interest targeting, and you can augment your prospecting activity with those audience lists. So again, you're not seeing any drastic changes.
So the targeting options are still available. It's just like you're saying, let's say less precise. It's clusters. It's bigger groups to make the individual user sort of disappear in the crowd, if you will. So you can't target that accurately. And then you said from precision to prediction.
Yeah, it's been more comfortable. This idea of the single customer view. Yeah, that's not really a thing anymore. Certainly when you go cross-channel, that's not really a thing. When you think about multi-touch attribution, that becomes quite difficult to do. Again, when you're going cross-channel, data-driven attribution can still be a thing, certainly within individual platforms. But this idea of precision becomes quite complicated. One-to-one marketing, the whatever it was, the right customer at the right time with the right ad, that becomes somewhat of a struggle.
Yeah.
So the industry, by and large, has a hell of a lot of first-party data. It could probably do a few more interesting things with that first-party data.
Yeah.
But it generally has first-party data. But
for the existing base, right? But I guess that's more the sort of the prospecting part of the equation. How do we find new customers, right?
Yeah, and that's where in the US, for example, even across Europe, free-to-play games starting to become quite interesting. There are ways in which operators and affiliates can adjust their model to think about products that they can perhaps put out there that might not well generate revenue, but are there simply to collect first-party data, to augment their existing data, to help them do more interesting things with. So, there are some fairly subtle changes that could be made as well. But the industry is in a reasonable place.
So it's about being creative. It's about getting comfortable with not being 100% accurate, and
and that talks to the cultural point I made up front. That fast fail, that experimentation type culture. Look, these are easy throwaway things to say.
Yeah.
But being happy at 70% accurate, or being happy with a project, being taken on that's got a 70% chance of success. I think that's what we're going to need to see in order to create the necessary change to adjust to what will be, and again, hate to say it, a new normal and a privacy-centric future.
I want to go back to YouTube. You were mentioning it a little bit in the beginning. So let's talk a little about YouTube. For me, there's kind of two things. There's the content side of things. Really interesting to hear your thoughts on streaming. What's the future of content? Is it short form, long form, all these kind of things, and that could be really fun. Also, YouTube Shorts. I don't know how widely launched it has been yet, but it would be fun to hear about that. Let's start there. Content on YouTube. What's the latest and greatest? What's top of mind on your side of things?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, YouTube's a weird and wonderful beast. And I alluded to at the start of our conversation, watching Joe Wicks' exercise videos, helped maintain my sanity at the start of lockdown, and that's YouTube in its purest form. It's a home for people's passions. I like the NFL. I'm not exposed to the same content that's available in the US. I know I can pop onto YouTube and watch Pat McAfee or Colin Cowherd or ESPN or the NFL content channel. So I'm surrounded by content that I want to consume when I want to consume it. So in itself, YouTube has a standout proposition, and the content that's on the platform has been through a little bit of a journey in recent years. If you were to think back 2 or 3 years ago, we probably didn't have the same level of premium content on the platform that we even have today. From a UK point of view, 15 minutes after every Sky Sports game, there will be a 6-minute highlight clip posted onto YouTube. 15 minutes to 30 minutes after every BT Sport game, there'll be a 6-minute highlight clip posted onto the platform. I had a chat with the NBA a few weeks ago, and they've been on the platform for 15 years and have posted some 80,000 videos, and they can now interact with 80 million uniques across the world. Again, it's mind-blowing to think about the control that they can have on their content, but also the distribution potential through a single global platform. And Byron Sharp calls it the first global ad-supported TV channel, and that's very much where it's at. And the content has been on a journey, and we're now in a place whereby there's the premium offerings, There's the behind the scenes and the fringe stuff. And again, I'm thinking about this through a sports lens. But then there's the player stuff, whereby the player can own his or her own content. There's the fan created stuff, and again, that each brings its own audience, and each brings an opportunity from an advertising side in which you can attach yourself. Arsenal TV, again over here in the UK, it polarizes Arsenal football fans, but it gets a hell of a lot of views. And there's opportunities for sports betting companies to perhaps attach themselves to those views. And from a pure numbers point of view, it becomes interesting how users engage with that content. Again, in the UK, we had 20 million people in December watching YouTube via their TV. That's a big number. 20 million people watching YouTube via their TV. In the US, it's 120 million people would watch YouTube content through their TV.
So roughly the same ratio, actually. That's interesting. One third of the population, roughly, give or take.
Correct, and that's okay. That in itself brings about, and again with my marketing and advertising hat on, that brings about a whole bunch of complexities associated with AV planning, and where does YouTube fit into that media mix? 3 or 4 years ago, it was the domain of the performance practitioner or the search practitioner. What YouTube sat, you could buy it through AdWords. So you deal with it. Deal with it and tell us about the CPA. Is
YouTube reach and frequency, or is it CPA? Am I trying to build my brand here, or is it hardcore performance marketing? What's your view?
I mean, again, if it was me and I was spending my money, I'd be using it for reach and frequency. I'd very much be thinking about it as a way in which I could hit 18 to 34s. We have 98% reach of 18 to 34s. That's the future of any sports betting or casino company, or any bingo company or whatever else. There's 90 minutes of content consumed on YouTube by 18 to 34s every day. That's out of 6 hours of total content consumption. Live TV is about 75 minutes, and a chunk of that's the BBC, which you can't advertise on. So the opportunity is extensive, certainly from a brand building point of view.
So I guess where the conversation still sits, right, is if you want to reach the masses and you want to build brand, in a big way, then it's still TV, and YouTube is let's say secondary in that conversation. Are you saying now that YouTube, from a reach perspective, reach and frequency, YouTube can now match TV or even better than TV? Is that sort of the view on it, or is it more like being part of the mix? Like how would you say it?
There's still a balance to be struck. And I think at this point, YouTube is still a incremental option on top of TV. But again, within this industry, what we have to be considerate of is the complexities and nuances that are not familiar to other industries. So, for example, you would have the whistle to whistle ban in the UK. In the UK, you would have the 9 p.m. watershed. You would have the exposure risk of under 18s seeing your ads. You just can't stop that. Whereas on a platform such as YouTube, we only allow you to target 18 plus logged in users. So a user must be logged in and have declared that they are over 18. So in itself, there's a protection built into it. As I've said to you before, we offer category opt-out. So any user can say, I just don't want to see gambling ads.
So they can literally deselect the entire gambling category.
Correct.
And that's it. If they tick that box, that's it. Game over.
That's it. No gambling ads. And again, these are the benefits of being online. So you get this convergence effect whereby, if we were to think about YouTube now being, in effect, a TV channel, let's look at it through that lens and use that as a starting point. Yet you get the benefits of targeting that comes with digital. Yet you get the benefits of the protections that we can put in place that comes through digital. You very quickly get this very promising proposition that should be a fundamental part of every operator, even an aggregator to an extent, reach and frequency plans.
Yeah, and something like category opt out. My mind also goes to the creators, the content creators, right? It's a hot potato in the industry, you know, especially the casino streamers, on YouTube and Twitch and the like, you know, and there's a lot of controversy around, how hardcore can you be? How big wins can you show? How big can your average bet size be? For that to be sort of a good way of a good content piece, and I guess sort of now that there is a opt out of the entire category, I would say that speaks to thinking long term and building content that is sustainable, that is responsible, that is entertaining, and not just sort of short-term hardcore content, if that makes sense. I don't know how to describe it better. I don't know. What's your view on casino streaming in general, Chris? And how do you feel creators and operators, I guess, should think about this space? How should they behave, and how should they act?
Okay. Again, there's a lot in that. I said at the start of the YouTube piece that for me, YouTube allowed me to explore my passions. That's what YouTube allows. And if an individual's passion is to watch others hitting big game jackpots or to watch someone playing a slot machine, then YouTube presents a home, for that activity.
Yeah.
Whether or not we choose to allow monetization of that content is a different is a different conversation. And should we allow monetization of that content? Whether or not an operator then chooses to monetize or to advertise against that content is again a different conversation. We have the opportunity to opt out of all live streaming ads. We would typically advise to opt out of all live streaming ads just because of the unpredictability that's attached to that content, and the fact that this industry is already on a bit of a knife edge when it comes to its advertising practices. Now, there would be some edge cases whereby certain channels might well have a relationship with an operator, and therefore they would want to advertise against that. Absolutely. There might well be a relationship whereby there's in-video advertising, that sits outside of perhaps the products that we offer. Absolutely. Would advocate for that. And as to whether or not an operator should advertise or whether or not an operator should partner with live streaming, I think it comes down to what that operator is trying to achieve and the objectives and the strategy and ultimately the value that an operator would see out of that. I certainly don't think there shouldn't be a place for that, but whether or not that fits with what said operator is trying to achieve, that's for the operator to determine. From a YouTube and a platform point of view, we will provide the constructs with which to do that as safely as you can, but there would be elements outside of our control that an advertiser would have to be comfortable with.
Yeah. So, for example, the content of a stream, let's take a casino stream, for example, how much would YouTube go in and sort of scrutinize and look at, or a policy team or a moderation team saying, okay, these guys are, too aggressive, or these guys are clearly, for example, someone playing for, tens of thousands of pounds, or, 2,000 euro bets nonstop for 24 hours versus someone who is much more responsible, much smaller bet sizes, shorter sessions, et cetera, et cetera. Is it on the operator to find out what they're comfortable with and what they want to sort of monetize, support, work with in terms of content creators? Or is there also a moderation piece sitting on your side of what you will sort of tolerate, if you will?
Yeah, so there would be an element of brand suitability moderation on our side.
Yeah.
And by that I mean we don't allow ads against all channels. A channel will have to meet certain thresholds.
Yeah.
And that's determined through, number of subscribers. So you would have to have a minimum number of subscribers. You would have to have a minimum number of YouTube videos that have been put up. So we can look at all channels that have been that are able to advertise, and we can put a brand suitability check on top of that. But what we can't do is determine is determined to any great degree how well a channel sets up against industry morals or the rights and wrongs of what should happen within a given industry. It's very difficult for us to police that part of it, which is where we would then put that onus on the operator. And then it's for the operator to be comfortable through the regulation in whatever country they're in as to how that's set up against whatever advertising codes exist.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic.
So that's a long way of me saying, yeah, we put it on the operator.
Exactly. Well, that's absolutely fine. Chris, it's been a pleasure. Have a fantastic day and speak to you soon.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate the time.
Bye.